Welcome to Explore, Explain, Highlights. In this Highlights package, we'll be looking at Season 1, Episode 8, with our guest, Rachael Dottle, discussing the project, how France and Croatia made it to the World Cup final in one chart.
So this piece itself happened in one day. It was just a quick turnaround, and we had a few days of kind of break between the semi-final and the final. And I was talking with my editor at the time, Richie, who was the graphics editor, Richie King, and we were trying to think of a way to kind of get a narrative out of the World Cup, because the World Cup is such an exciting short-term thing that's happening across, for the whole world, and there's a really strong narrative in, like who's winning, what upsets were there, how do you feel that this excitement going on. So this piece came out of the pieces that we had already built, but it was a spontaneous kind of how can we convey this narrative in like an exciting way with what we have in one day.
Yeah, and that's interesting as well.
I think it's kind of hard because this was such a quick turnaround. I didn't spend that much time thinking about like alternatives because I just didn't have the time. And the limitations were I wanted something that I could work on in a couple hours. I had to work with what I had already because we didn't have time to generate any new analysis,
right.
Which I remember talking about with Richie, kind of like how can we make some sort of timeline or overview of what's happened. Like, do we want to look at certain players or cards that were given out, or I think the Guardian tracked the goals by player, like they had a golden boot tracker, and I think I was coming up with kind of ideas about how to like summarize what had happened so far before the final. But to be honest, I think that I was just looking at these area charts and kind of staring at them and thinking like, we already have a story here, and I don't have time to do all this extra work, and obviously the editors need time to look at it before it can be published, so I need to make space for the process. So I felt very like constrained to kind of like use these area charts, and not in a bad way. I think that ended up making it kind of what it is right now, which is a kind of a strong story, and I think it feels very emotional to me. I also wonder how much interaction really is necessary for this piece, because interaction is great, but it doesn't always have to add, it doesn't always add stuff that's necessary, and I think that looking back, I probably would have been tempted to add interaction just for interaction's sake, but I like that this was, again, constrained by all of the time and the process, so it lives as kind of a static piece that I think is almost like a poster feeling, and I like that, so I'm glad that I didn't have the time to make it interactive.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, FiveThirtyEight's graphic team is was really pretty small at the time. So it was me, Gus Wezerick, Ella Kuzi, and Julia Wolf. And actually, all of them had kind of a involvement in this product, along with kind of the mastermind behind the entire World Cup package, which would be Jay Boyce, who is a computational journalist at FiveThirtyEight. And he is kind of the one involved in a lot of the modeling, the back end of all of the predictions. But so Julia Wolf actually contributed to the area charts on the predictions page. So she and Jay Boyce were working on the predictions in the area chart format. Gus and I had been working on World Cup content since November of the previous year. So we had been talking about how to kind of visualize the World Cup for months. And Ella was always my visual edit like wizard mastermind, so I would always send like sketches to her to kind of get her, because she is such like a great visual editor. So I felt like this was a really collaborative piece, like most of my pieces at FiveThirtyEight. I think that everybody there was able to kind of input on how this was going to look, and that's really helpful for me. And that goes to also for the editors at FiveThirtyEight, both the kind of visual editors and the kind of editorial editors.
Yeah, I think that collaborative spirit comes across because, all FiveThirtyEight work has a certain visual identity that you can recognise, and that doesn't just come about as a consequence of guidelines of colour usage and typeface. It's something that has to come about through this kind of cross-fertilization of not just ideas, but kind of shared editing responsibilities of each other work. And I think that is, very, very apparent in all 538 pieces.
I'm really proud of this piece. I think that it was I think it was actually my first solo byline at 538. So obviously 538, with a small newsroom and a small graphics team, there's a lot of collaborations, and even this obviously was a collaboration, but I was really proud of this because I think it was the first byline I had with just my name on it, and I had input from everybody, but it was a really exciting kind of, hey, I had this kind of visual idea and it went through and now it's on the internet and people like it. So but the World Cup is kind of accessible to a lot of people because, you don't have to know anything about football before watching the World Cup, because you can, choose a country, your country, any country to support, and you can watch all the way through and you get to feel the excitement without having to already have some knowledge of which league teams are ranked where. The World Cup is its own little world that you can be a part of for a month. And so I think what I was hoping was that those people who had gotten interested in the World Cup, especially being in the United States when the US wasn't even in it, but people could kind of get involved. I was hoping that this would kind of encapsulate that life that they had lived for the past 3.5 weeks and, feel it and go beyond kind of just the people who look at 538 for the prediction. So actually we had a lot of back and forth about this, and especially with Jay when we were first working on the predictions page itself. We wanted to stay true to the colors of the country or the country flag, but the problem is that there are so few colors used in country flags or in jerseys or in whatever. They repeat so many times that we had to kind of, I think within the as the World Cup was playing out, a couple times Jay had to go in and kind of adjust the color on the match because they were too similar. So we stayed somewhat true, and then we would adjust when we noticed that there was not enough contrast.
Right.
And for this, I know I adjusted a few of them because the colors were, blue, red, and yellow, and those were the colors. And I think that was getting really old for me, and it's hard to see contrast and see the power of the path if everything is the same color. So I know that I made some kind of decisions about colors to change to make the most impact. For example, I think the Spain and Russia using the blue, just to make it more contrasty. And I had to make decisions based on which teams were going forward.
Right.
So England, for example, going forward and thinking about what color to use when it comes and hits against Croatia, and same with Belgium, with France. I wanted to make sure that those colors were contrasting enough. And I think the decisions I made were not always true to what color the team uses, but some of them had to be.
Yeah, and I think the idea of, let's start off with the idea of using the colour and then there's a trade-off at some point is the most logical heuristic to use. And obviously when you've got problematic colours like England being in white and inevitably you've got a white background for most works, then that's a challenge.
It was exciting to see it resonate with people. I think it was one of the graphics that got a lot of traction on Twitter, which I hadn't really experienced before. I think most of my pieces kind of, lived on in other ways, but this was cool to see so many people repost it and kind of talk about it. I'm really proud of it. I think it's really cute.
Thank you for joining us for this Explore, Explain highlights episode. As always, the full episode is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We hope to see you again soon on another episode of Explore, Explain.